it could not be transmitted. And yet, the immediate political reaction to that crisis, I think Barnaby Joyce and Marshall in South Australia, and followed up by Turnbull and Frydenberg and everyone, was to blame renewables. And renewables have nothing to do with that. At a time where, we are already, global sense, we're already behind the game. And we're probably at or past a tipping point in terms of a sensible response to the challenge of climate change globally that would see us get net zero emissions by 2050. And there's this sort of simple political belief, I guess, that you could wait to 2049 and achieve that. Because actually you're changing behaviour, you're changing the industrial structure of most economies. It takes time to implement. The transition is difficult. It needs to be managed, it needs to be looked. You need to have sort of a 30 to 50 year strategy against which you work in bite-sized chunks, day in and day out. You don't see that in our political process. We still haven't had yet an explanation as to how we'll get a 5% reduction in emissions by 2020 off a 2000 base. And we've got a Paris commitment now of 26 to 28% reduction in emissions by 2030, which is about half what the Climate Change Authority recommended they should be. And we've got a long way to go. And the transition to that is going to require a very focused strategy on renewables. And I was so annoyed with the response to South Australia, not only in terms of the base politics of that, but to turn on the so-called Labor states because they had ambitious renewable aspirations seemed just to be unconscionable. There were great expectations, particularly in relation to the issue of climate change in the light of what he'd said in the past about climate change. There are now two views about that. One, he was passionately committed to that, but he did a deal to get the leadership. The other one is he never actually believed it at all. It's a position he adopted in order to differentiate his product at the time from one of the other leaders. Malcolm is proud of saying that it's an exciting time to be an Australian. I asked him to add two words to that. It's an exciting time to be an Australian Prime Minister. And if he doesn't provide that sort of leadership at the cabinet level, if he doesn't take on some of the minority, and I'd say the minority conservative views within the government, then I think the situation is just going to drift and drift alarmingly. And that is my greatest concern. I think the only way you deal with that is continue to build the momentum outside government for change. So at some point, somebody looks at one of those polls, somebody pays attention to the fact that they may not get re-elected unless they are seen to be doing something substantive about climate change. Thank you. Thank you, John.